Good evening to all of you, our First Baptist Church Denby family and community. We welcome you to this, the first night of our Social Justice Week. We're glad that you are able to come and be joined with us on tonight as we kick this night off to talk about those issues that are relevant to us and our community. We will have our scripture tonight, which will come from Amos 5:21 through 24, followed by prayer, and then followed by our presentation on voter suppression and laws. This is where Christ and the community meets. So we hope that as you join us in this sacred space and in this sanctuary, that you will come with your hearts and minds in tune about how we can change our world for the better. Let us go to our scripture. Amos 5:21 and 24 through 24, it says, I, the Lord, hate and despise your religious celebrations and your times of worship. I won't accept your offerings or animal sacrifices, not even your very best. No more of your noisy songs. I won't listen when you play your harps, but let justice and fairness flow like a river that never runs dry. Amen. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his holy word. Let us bow for prayer. Most wise God, our eternal Father, we come now on tonight to lift your name up on high. As we come to bring forth these issues, dear God, where the church must intersect, dear God, with our natural world, dear God, that we may bring about change, that people's lives will be affected, that they may change for the better. God, that we make an impact on this world, oh God, that we're not only talking to Christ, God, but we're showing Christ. God, we ask you now that bless the presenter that will come forth tonight, that will bring us knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. God, that when we leave this sacred place, oh God, that we will go empowered to go change a dying world. We ask all these things in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Our presenter for the night will be none other than the Reverend Dr. Earl Johnson, amen. We know he is knowledgeable. He will come and present to us tonight on voter suppression and the upcurrent changing of the laws in Jesus.
You're getting us kicked off, and welcome again, you all, to our Social Justice Week, where we're here to talk about some of the key issues affecting the Afro-American community. And we're so delighted to have you here joining us from Facebook or any kind of social media that you may be on today. I really appreciate it. We came up with the concept of this Social Justice Week to invite the community into what we're doing here at First Baptist Church in terms of our outreach programs, in terms of our ability to stay engaged with the wider community, especially with the global community, with all the issues and all that's going on. And so we want to present something to you for the rest of the week that we hope will challenge you, that we hope to get you more engaged in what is happening around the globe, especially what's happening locally. I think the old phrase is this, act locally, think globally and act locally. I think that's what we're trying to do tonight. So some of the issues we'll be dealing with, I think most of you already know, but tonight we'll be dealing with voter suppression. And I've been on the for voting rights and working with people who are suffering from things of that nature, who have been denied their right to vote, and for the last better part of 20 years, I would say. And so I figured I would talk about that, and then we did have another guest, but we couldn't get them on at the time. But I think I have enough information for everybody to go on, amen? And so I want to get started with that. We're talking about voter suppression, and if you notice today, you'll notice that the president was in Tulsa, Oklahoma today, addressing the Tulsa massacre, where hundreds of our people were killed, and businesses were torn apart, lives were torn apart, things were destroyed. But he was there talking about the massacre itself, and then he went over to voter and talked about the fact that there are people who are trying to destroy our democracy, trying to destroy our right to vote, trying to keep us from voting, trying to keep us from those typical things. And so what I want to talk about tonight is pick back on what he had to say. And it's important for us tonight as we go into this presentation, it's important for us to realize that the target areas for many of the voting restrictive laws are directly related to Afro-American and people of color communities. They are doing everything they can to disenfranchise our votes, to keep us from voting, and we have to be alert. And that's the reason for this presentation, to make us aware and alert, and also to give some solutions as to what we can do in order to combat any kind of voter suppression or anything that we might see at the polling places, any kind of literature or mails or email, anything that's coming out attacking our right to vote. And so we need to be very vigilant about that. One of the biggest things in Congress right now is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And we need to have that passed so we can continue not only to uplift those who want to vote and give some hope for voting, but also to make sure that some of the states who are trying to dismantle our voting efforts make sure that their plans can now be looked at by the Justice Department before they can go into effect. Chief Justice Roberts took that away several years ago. Of course, most of you have read and understand that. But that's something that's been taken away from us. But we want to try to bring that back together again and try to get all the stuff. Congress has what they call the For the People Voting Rights Act. And so we're looking to have that passed. Well, I'll talk about all those things in a little while. But just to get things started, if you recall, 6 months ago, before the 2016 election or the president's election, Donald Trump told the nation that if he lost the election, that it would be because of voter fraud. Now, he said this 6 months out, right? He said 6 months out that if he lost, it would be because of a rigged election. So in other words, he would not lose because, 80-some million people went out and voted against him. But he would lose because the process was rigged. And he put that out there, and people started floating that whole idea, and they started doing things within that time frame to try to dilute individual votes. And so after he lost the election, he again began to promote the same lie again, that he lost because of what he said 6 months ago. So it's almost like me putting something out a year early, and then it doesn't come in. Then I can say, oh yeah, it was the daughter of what I said 6 months ago. And so this is what has happened. And so the myth, voter fraud, and people who do voting polls and understand the whole mechanisms of voting have already declared that there's very little voter fraud anywhere in the country. I mean, some states could not report any. But anyway, he wants to lay this myth out there so people can believe that he lost as a result of that. And so what he calls now the big lie is that Biden is not a legitimate president, and the people in mostly black urban areas cheated. In other words, he said we don't know how to vote correctly, that our names were misspelled, or we didn't turn in the right ballots, or somebody had to help us, or we're just not honest when it comes to absentee ballots, and when it comes to going to the polls, we might vote 2 and 3 times. This is the mess that's out there regarding African Americans when we vote. There's some people that don't want us to vote, right? And so they come up with all these disclaimers that urban areas like in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, this is one of the areas they're targeting. They're going to Atlanta, Fulton County, some of the other counties where have large black populations, going to Iowa, and areas where Des Moines, probably where large African-American areas are as well, and Texas, and we'll talk about Texas in a little while, but Florida and Dade County. This is where they are going. They're going into areas where there are large pockets of African Americans and people of color are, and they're saying that we must have done something, because Georgia really doesn't go to Democrats, right, in a presidential election. It used to go to Republicans. But something must have happened, right? Somebody must have cheated. Somebody must have done something wrong in order for Georgia to go to Joe Biden. And so those 13,000 votes that they've been trying to find, and Donald Trump trying to get somebody, Brad Ruffin in Georgia, try to dig up, were just not there. And now they're in the process of doing some kind of recount with a group called Ninja Voters, I guess, or something like that. But whatever they may be, the reality is that they have not found anything. and that they are looking for us as people of color. That's why this is so important for us tonight as we talk about voter suppression, talk about voting. We have always voted in this country. There's never been a time when we have never voted. Not never voted, but it's not, since we've been able to vote, we've been voting. And so, and we've been doing it legitimately. We have not had to cheat to vote, and we have not had to help people cheat to get elected. You know, we have been fair and true to our voting and to the voting process. I don't know why anybody all of a sudden would declare that now we are not fair in our voting process when they have polling booths in the African-American community, that they are rigged machines and there's something wrong with them and all of that foolishness. So, so we need to be vigilant, as if people say we need to stay woke and make sure that this is not going to happen in various communities. And so Trump supporters, along with the Republican parties, kind of promoted this big lie. And it's going on all over the country right now. And I'll give you some stats in a moment. If I get my spreadsheet up, I can actually get my PowerPoint up. I can show you some things that's going on. If you go to the next slide and keep going a little bit more. Yeah, well, they can't see that, but I can. So that's okay, but leave it there. They may be able to zoom in at home and get a look at that. But for the most part, Trump has convinced his own party to promote this big lie. And although elections officials have confirmed and certified that the election is certified, that it's true, it's real, the people voted, there was nothing wrong with it. And so all the states and all the cities that he's trying to undo have already certified the election. But yet he goes on and on and on about the big lie about somebody has stolen something from him simply because he cannot handle defeat. And so his supporters and governors from different places around the country are still spreading this false narrative and this lie about voter fraud, and they're doing everything they can to do. Now, what's happening? What brings us here tonight is the restrictive laws that's been put in place. So all the places that I mentioned, Georgia, Florida, Wisconsin, Iowa, New Hampshire, other places like that have, for the most part, put in major restrictive laws. Restrictive laws are laws that restrict your vote. And on the screen, you can see the places with the most restrictive laws, and I just mentioned them. But the reality is that there are state lawmakers have enacted over 24 laws since 2020 election. Now, 2020 election was just in November. We just got a president in January, and already we have laws on the books to restrict voting rights coming for the 2022 midterm elections. And they intend to win these midterm elections by hook or crook. It doesn't matter. They want to get the majority back in the House, so they can set House rules and try to rule people's lives, govern people's lives, and do whatever they want to do, and send things up to the Senate, which right now, with all the filibuster, we're not going to be able to get much done anyway, right? And so, according to the Brennan Center for Justice at the New York University School of Law, 22 laws in 14 states have already hit the record books. Restricted voting rights are already there, and so as I press on to discuss a little more about this, there are 361 bills introduced, or there were 361 bills introduced since March 24th in 47 states. If you go back go back once on the slide, back to the blue and the green colors, right there. So 361 bills introduced. Don't forget this now. This is March 24th. We're talking about 300 and some restricted bills that will restrict in 47 different states. 55 restricted bills are moving toward passage in 24 states. Get a hold of that. In 24 states, they're ready to put together restricted laws to restrict your right to vote. And we'll talk about what some of those laws are and what some of those laws mean. 29 states have already passed at least one chamber, have already passed some law in one chamber of the House. And so all they're waiting on to get to the next chamber, get to some kind of committee, and then they'll come out as well. 5 bills have already been signed into law. Now, will these laws be challenged? Of course they will. Of course there will be lawyers from different groups, voting rights groups out there, I'm sure, who would challenge some of these laws in the courts. But don't forget, Donald Trump spent most of his presidency stacking courts, federal courts and the U.S. Supreme Court. So, I mean, you got conservative judges out there who might let this stuff slide by. So it's one of those situations where it's just not helpful. Again, I want to mention that Georgia, Texas, Florida, Arizona, Iowa, Wisconsin, New Hampshire, and Michigan are the states with the most restricted laws right now. And you ought to be lucky here in Virginia that you have a Democratic governor and a Democratic legislator. And you better hope it stays that way. If I were you in Virginia, I'll try to keep this a blue state, because if you don't, all of these from other southern states definitely will hit here. North Carolina still has some of the most restrictive laws as well, but the ones that's coming out, and that has come out since February this year, the most restricted ones are the states that I just mentioned. Now, so what does that mean for you? That means that if you're in a state that's promoting such laws, then you need to do something about it, right? You need to write to your senators, write to your representatives. You need to do something. You need to protect yourself against your right to vote. It is your right. That's why they call it voting rights. It's a right for you. And so you need to get out and exercise that and look at the laws in your state and determine, what your laws say. What does the law in Virginia say about absentee ballots, that when, especially coming up in 2022? What does it say in New York? What does it say in California? What does it say in Connecticut or somewhere in Mississippi? What are the laws going to be on the books? And believe me, you're the one that has to be informed. They're depending on you to be ignorant, right? To say, oh, I didn't know that. That's what they're waiting on you to walk up to the polls, not having any voter ID, not having anything that you need. They're waiting on you to say, oh, I didn't know that, right? And then you get out of line, and a lot of restrictions and laws in, and if they can't do anything on a federal level, they have to do everything on a state level, and even at on the state level, they are disempowering state officials. Election officials used to do. They're setting the standards for them now. And so that's another problem that we have with this whole process. And so the restricted laws include absentee voting, and I'll talk about how these impact, but after voter ID requirements, voter registration, voter roll purging, and voter roll purging is something that's fairly new to me, because it kind of caught me a couple of years ago when somebody in my church told me that they went to register, and because he was dead. And he said, I'm not dead, I'm standing here looking at you, right? And so this is what these people are doing. They got groups of people going out, most of them conservative people, going out to the election boards and looking at records and everything and declaring people who are alive dead and taking their names off the roll. In Ohio, a few years ago, they deleted almost 800,000 people from the rolls, from the voter rolls, and declare people dead, and the people are right where they said they were. And so this is the kind of thing that's going on. So when you empower people like those, like the Republican GOP want to do in terms of empowering citizens to go into a polling booth and challenge somebody whether it's them or not, it's a challenge for us and something that we must do. And so who knows who's been purged from the rules and who hasn't? That's a major thing that we're going to have to deal with in this country and deal with among ourselves. And so that's voter roll purges. And then you have early voting, which is also another problem for many of us. The early voting in most of the southern states, and I know now it's hitting some of the northern states, but the early voting is something that not only and some Republicans were doing absentee voting, it wasn't a problem. But now, all of a sudden, it seems to be a problem now that Afro people are starting to decide, hey, you know, because of the pandemic, it was spurred by the pandemic, because of the pandemic, I'm going to do absentee ballot. And now it's a problem all of a sudden. Now you got to have ID with it. Now you got to have some kind of witness. Now you got to have some signatures. I mean, there's like 5 or 6 new things they put on an absentee ballot for you to vote. And so it's all changed. It's all changed, and it very quickly. Also, another thing, I talked about early voting, then undermining the power of local officials. I talked about that too. How they're dismantling some of the election officials who are in charge of doing this work. I mean, let the people do their job. But now state legislators want to legislate whether these people can do their job or not. And I think that's a shame that we elect who they are, and then the legislative branch come along and say, well, we don't like them because it's partisan and try to take away their rights to govern. And so the people on the local level are disempowered in many cases to do anything about the laws that's coming down from the state level. And so if you're in a local area like Newport News, like Richmond, Virginia, or somewhere like that, if you're in an area like and so how restricted laws work in most states. So by limiting absentee ballots and requiring voters to provide a state ID number or a photocopy. Now this is what they're doing this is what they're going to do with the absentee ballots now, absentee voting in some states. They require you to provide a state ID, okay? And don't forget now, state ID is different. And then also some states want you to have a federal ID where you have to go back to DMV and you have to get it on your driver's license so you can show that you have been cleared, you have a federal ID. And so that's something that some states are working toward. I don't know how far they are. I have one already. I have a star on mine showing that I have a federal ID. But some states are more aggressive in making sure you have that than others. And so they want you to have a state identification number if you're going to do an absentee ballot. They want you to have a photocopy of an identifying document, right, with their absentee ballot application. So you're going to send the application in, you need to have your state ID card, or you need some kind of photo with it. And then you also need to understand that what happens is that with the absentee ballots is that they are barring election officials from affirmatively sending out ballot applications. And so your local guy who used to send you application has been barred from doing that. So he can no longer, or his committee in some states now, not in all, has been barred from doing that. So they can't send out the applications like they want. And so if that's the case, then who sent them out, right? Who are they empowering to send out applications to people? And so and so also under the absentee voting, they give voters less time to apply for an absentee ballot. In some states, you may have 2 weeks, you may have a month, and some may have narrowed it down to a couple of weeks or a couple of days. And so you have to be careful. You need to be mindful of that. You need to find out from your local officials coming up in the election in 2022. You need to be asking questions, okay, what are the new rules for the absentee ballots in my state for? Because there are certain states, as I mentioned, have already passed these laws. And so you ask the question, what must I do what do I need to know in order to vote in 2022 when it comes to absentee ballots? Because a lot of things have been changed. And in another case, they have restricted the availability and hours of the drop boxes, okay? And so now you know the same guy that Trump put into power with the U.S. Postal Service is the same guy now that's still in charge. I mean, Biden didn't get rid of him. He's still there because he couldn't. but he does have a panel set up where the guy can make any hard decisions without it being approved panel, but he did restrict some of the things he could do. But the reality is that now they're saying the drop box hours are going to be tampered with. You're not going to have as much time to get during the day to get it there. For example, if you got an all-night drop box in your neighborhood, I don't know, somehow they're going to cut the time off. I don't know how they're going to do that. I know they're going to put locks on it or something. This is early voting in many counties. And we'll talk about the early voting process on the next slide. Okay, restricted voting on the next slide. Restrictive laws again. And so some of the bills restrict voter eligibility, meaning that one person can come to listen to this carefully, that one person can come to a county clerk's office and seek to have an unlimited number of voters removed from the voter rolls for being ineligible. Now that's tricky, y'all, because they're training people, as we speak right now, there are different subgroups is out there that's behind us. This is a strategic move. This is not people doing this haphazardly. These are people who have been plotting this for years. This whole conservative mantra has been in the works for years, and they are working it now because they feel they're empowered. They feel that Donald Trump had 75 million people that voted for him, and so these people will be on their side no matter what they try to do. So they are emboldened now, and so they have all kinds of pockets of groups out there, and these groups are working along with Republican operatives to make sure that these laws are put in place. And many of the people in the GOP legislature don't even know what the bills are. They don't even know what the laws are. The laws have just been sent up from some subgroup out in the community, been sent up for them, and they just read them in Congress and say, let's make this a law, because their group has already decided that this is what we have to do in order to make it law. And so somebody has come up with the idea that somebody can go into a county clerk's office. County clerk is where your voting material, all that stuff lies. So they can go into your office and seek to have an unlimited, okay? I didn't say limited, but unlimited. That means everybody in there, they can have an unlimited number of voters removed from the voters' roll for being ineligible. And this is a direct violation of the National Voter Registration Act. But they don't care. They're going to do it. They want to do it anyway, you know. And so it bodes you well to find out when we come to these restricted laws and we come to voter suppression in your neck of the woods, is to take a look at what people are doing in your particular election. Because what I'm giving you tonight is the national scale. I don't have any local stuff to give you. But nationally, this is what's taking place. And believe me, if it's happening in one state, it happened to another. CNN, MSNBC, and all of them are reporting, ABC, CBS, all of them are reporting now that what's happening in Arizona, what's happening in Texas and Florida is kind of making its way around the country. I just told you there are 47 states that already have some kind of restrictive voting laws on the books now. And so your state has something, or somebody's trying to slip something through in the state that you reside in. And so the challenge for you is to find out what they are. Know before you go. Before you go to the polls, know what these are. And so, case, I think this was in Florida or Georgia, you know, it was a crime for giving snacks or water to voters waiting in line. I mean, come on, how real can you get? I mean, you know, to restrict voting laws and tell somebody if they get hot because of the hot sun, because the lines are so long, and they got to wait for hours before they can vote, and the reason why they're waiting for hours is because you slowed up the voting process on the inside yourself. You made it harder for them to get inside to make the vote with the machines that you have and with all the scrutiny that's going to be going on. Let me tell you, the lines are going to be much longer in 2022. They're going to be much longer because these people, if they get on the inside and start looking at you and start examining who you are, start examining your material, whether or not you're eligible to vote or not, turning you around that you can't vote, if they do that with every individual that walks through the door, you know how long it's going to take for you to vote? It's going to be a long time. You're going to be in line for a long time. And so what the states are trying to do, some of them are really trying to make that happen. So they tell you now you can't even get a drink of water for somebody who's standing in line. I don't know how they can be enacted. I don't know if anybody will ever do that, but it's just so absurd to even have something like that on them. And so the biggest thing you get from here, one of the biggest things you get from here is just knowing that there's people in some of these states have written into law that somebody can walk into the county clerk's office, move an unlimited number of people off the voter rolls. And that unlimited number, restrictive laws, some other restrictive laws. New legislation does a number of things to restrict your voting access. It risks flawed voter purges. And so the new legislation that's coming up in many places today, they have a number of things to restrict voting access. And I just talked about some of them. We'll deal with some more of them because there's a lot of laws out here. I'm telling you, there are 400 and some laws by the Brennan Report that people are putting out to restrict voting rights, okay? And so the new legislation does a number of things. Another thing it does is that it risks flawed voter purges by moving voters to inactive status. 2020 election, then some states will purge you from the voter rolls because you didn't vote in the last election. Because you didn't vote in the last election, they say you don't deserve to vote. That's what they're trying to say. Now, you could have been sick. You could have been hospitalized during the voting, during that period. Maybe you couldn't sound a pin for absentee ballots. Maybe you going under surgery or something that day. You couldn't do anything to sign anything, and so you couldn't vote. But now some states have millions of people that may be under such guidelines. I mean, it doesn't have to be that you decided not to vote. What if you just couldn't get there? What, like I said, operations or maybe there was some glitches somewhere in the process and didn't allow you to do that. And now all of a sudden they got a chance to come in and try to restrict that. In the state of Iowa, for example, they want to use the Postal Service, the U.S. Postal Service, change of address data for list maintenance. So they want to take all of the names of voters that come through the post office in Iowa to use as a list of maintenance so they can maintain the voting roll is what they want. They want the whole list to come to them, to certain groups, so those groups can do whatever they want to do. So that's another thing. They are also threatening county auditors with criminal prosecutions for not abiding by voter purge laws. So if you don't abide by the purge laws, then you can be prosecuted as a local official. Think about that for a moment. Think about that. These people, many of them who are at the polls, have been doing this kind of work for 20, 25, and 30 years. They've been volunteering their lives, most of their lives, volunteering at polls to make sure people can get a right to vote. Now, all of a sudden, somebody comes in and tells you, well, you didn't do this right, or you didn't do it right, and so you can be criminalized because of a mistake you may have made or because something you didn't see or something you didn't do based on somebody else. And who gets to decide who's criminalized? The people that the GOP put in charge. They get to decide whether or not you get penalized and how much your penalty is. So, I mean, and so that's the kind of foolishness we're talking about when we talk about these restrictive laws. And also, bills also restrict access to absentee voting by giving voters less time to apply with absentee. And so, in other words, you may not have as much time as you thought you would have on the absentee ballot. I don't know the time frames, and the Brennan Report did not give time frames on this, so I'm not sure exactly how much time you will have on the absentee ballot. But you can always check with your state to find out what some of these could be. And so the limiting of elected officials' discretion to provide ballot box drops, and many of them in many states are not going to be there. So if you go to your local officials and you're trying to get access to ballot box, and think about it now, if you're an Afro community, in many instances, you probably don't even have a mailbox anywhere anyway, a drop box anyway, right? You're lucky if you got one. I mean, when I grew up, I had to go to the post office. I mean, they had no drop box nowhere in my neighborhood, and for the most part, they still don't. But the ones that are there, they have taken them up. That's what Trump guy did last year. He took up all the boxes and slowed down the mail, right? So you couldn't get stuff in. I mean, they did everything could to keep this man in power, and they're still trying to do everything they can to keep him in power. But it's not only keeping Donald Trump in power, it's keeping a white supremacy mandate in charge and in power as well. That's really what it's all about. It's trying to whitewash America, right? And it's trying to make America as white as it can be, and everybody else to be a subgroup in this nation. And so they're doing everything they can in order to do that. And so what we have to do is be woke. We have to be aware. We have to understand what the laws are that's taking place in our neighborhood. And so with the drop boxes, I think that was so crazy, man. So now you got to go to the post office to drop your mail off. And now some states got laws that nobody else can drop off your ballot. Let's say, for example, I'm going to the post office, and you say, will you put this in the mail while you're there? And they find out you did it, and some you can't do that. And so it's become problematic, and it's becoming a real problem. It also restricts early voting by shortening the early voting period. We'll talk about that in a little while. And this is only in the state of Iowa, I believe, where their bill came out and said that they shortened early voting period by 9 days, okay, and limited official discretion in terms of in addition to days. So you got 9 days of early voting. Early voting used to be almost a month. A month we used to have all the time to go do early voting. Now it's the window has closed to a slit when it comes to early voting. And so now we have to get the early voting done within a small window between a week or 2 weeks, okay? And so that's going to be problematic for a lot of us as well. And so the next thing I want to talk about as we move toward restrictive laws, I just want to take a look at Arizona and what Arizona is doing with as well. In Arizona, 7 restrictive bills, 4 Arizona bills, seek to make absentee voting more difficult by prohibiting election officials from sending mail ballots to voters without an affirmative request, making it easier to remove voters from the permanent early voting list. And so, in other words, I got to request the ballot now. I got to request it. And so once I request it, the officials are also limited as to what they can send out, right? And so it makes it difficult by prohibiting election officials from sending mail ballots. I mean, how do you define where you send your photo ID and you send a photocopy, birth certificate, whatever it is that you have to send, right? But you didn't have to do that before. You didn't. You had your name, your address, your phone number, making it easier to remove voters from the permanent early voting list. So if you were on the early voting list, they'll move you off the early voting list. And one of the things I think we need to discuss too is that during early voting, don't forget this fact that your early voting polling site is not your voting site. Please, in 2022, when midterm elections come around, you can do early voting almost anywhere in your city that has early voting lines, but don't forget on election day, you have to go to your polling site. You have to go where you normally vote. I've seen so many people showing up at early voting sites trying to vote there, and that's not their precinct. You have to go to your regular precinct, and we can't forget that. We have to let our young people know that we can do early voting there, but on election day, we have to go where our address says we need to go in the location in which we live and wherever our polling sites are. We can't forget that. And so it's requiring further identification information on absentee ballots. I talked about that earlier. And limiting time that voters have to supply a signature for their mail-in ballot on a forgotten signature. So if you forget to sign your ballots, they limited the time that you can sign it. So let's say, for example, I mail mine in today, and the cutoff for absentee ballots is next week. Let's say the official finds out that I don't have a signature on it, find out Thursday I don't have a signature on it. And then he mails it back to me and tells me I don't have a signature on it. And then I got to mail it back to him with a signature on it. And by the time that ballot gets back, guess what? It's no good. The doors are going to be closed. That's another sleazy tactic that these people are using. So you need to make sure that your ballot is signed before you send it out. And make sure it's plain, that they can read it, that it's your name, right? And so that's just another way of disenfranchising people. Another bill will prevent local officials, and I think I said this already, from conducting voter registration drives on non-government property. My goodness. And so you can't even put up a voter registration booth unless it's on, in the way I'm reading this now, he said, another bill will prevent local election officials, from conducting voter registration drives on non-government property. So you can't do a voter registration drive at a church anymore? Is that what they're trying to say? Or you can't do drives at a school anymore like we do? I mean, unless it's at a school anymore? But you can't do it on private property? Is that what George is trying to say here? But you in Georgia, you check that out and find out what they mean by that. And this is key for people who are doing voter registration drives. I mean, where are you going to conduct your voter registration drives at starting now? Because you ought to be starting now, really. 2022 is right around the corner. We ought to be starting now getting people registered to vote and looking at these laws to try to find out what we can do to make sure that the House of Representatives is not overturned in 2022 and that we have elected officials who want to move this forward country and not want to just sit there just sit there and not do anything, move the country forward. And so we need to make sure you look at that. Georgia also has 2 bills that seek to prohibit policies that the state does not even have. Did you hear that? They have policies that prohibit policies that the state doesn't even have. Automatic voting registration and election day registration. They don't even have that. But they already have a law against it. So move forward with more restricted laws. I'm looking at Texas now. And, of course, you heard all the news about Texas. And I'm so proud of our Democratic brothers, sisters who walked out the other night when this voter restricted bill in Texas came up. I'm glad they walked out and said enough is enough. They stopped the vote. They hindered it for some time. I don't know how long this is going to last, but they were able to do something. And I think other Democrats around the country need to start doing the same thing. We need more voices. We need people out there saying that this is wrong. We need to do more. We need Democrats to stop hiding behind rocks, stop hiding behind law, start hiding behind getting elected next year, and come on out and let's call these bills for what they are. They need to come out of the closets and start talking about it. I don't hear enough conversation among Democrats in Congress. I don't hear enough conversation about them in local legislation, especially in the General Assembly here in Virginia, General Assembly in North Carolina where I reside. I don't see enough people in those legislative branches talking about how our votes have been restricted. I mean, this needs to go to the people, all right? I mean, they're talking about this behind closed doors. They're dealing with it in general legislature, but that's something that they are talking about. But they need to bring this information to the people, to us, so we can hear and we can see what's going on. It ought to be a representative out there somewhere doing exactly what I'm doing tonight, talking about this issue, talking about what's happening in their district, what's happening in their community. They need to have workshops. They need to send their aides out and do workshops in their community to inform people exactly what is going on. But I see none of that happening. It looks like we just laid back and said, okay, let these laws come about, but somehow overcome them, if we get masses of people to vote. No, the 2020 election was an anomaly. When so many people came out, it was the largest election in the history of this country. You think we're going to have that every time to keep a Democrat in power? We are, as long as these restricted bills pass, and as long as we sit back and don't do anything about them. So we have to do something, not legislatively, but it needs to be brought to the people so that people can be aware. We need to have workshops like this around the country where people can understand what's happening to them, and the more you know, the more you do, right? And so if you know something, you do it. And so what I'm trying to impress upon tonight and what we're trying to do during the Social Justice Week is to challenge you. It's to challenge your officials, challenge your local authorities to do something, to speak out against things like that. Your vote has been disenfranchised, and we know the country, and we know where it has gone. We know how people feel about us when it comes to voting, and I don't need to go into all those details, but the reality is that there are some people that just don't want us to vote or even think we even deserve to vote, okay? And we had to fight for that. We had to do a lot to do that. And so to sit back and watch these Jim Crow laws come back into place, I mean, this is the new Jim Crow here. This is another form of new Jim Crow. It's back on the books, and these people are doing it with boldness and alacrity. They are enjoying what they're doing. They like this. I mean, it's like a game of hunter-gathering for them. I mean, they like it. I mean, they just sit back and come up with these laws all the time and just put a bill behind it and get some government person, GOP, to sponsor it. Let's sponsor this bill to restrict people in Texas. Now, Texas case doesn't have a whole lot to do with the national election, right? I mean, this Texas. Democrats haven't won the state of Texas, since I've been born, I guess. Maybe since John F. Kennedy, right? But we're not going to, the electoral votes in Texas usually going to go to a Republican anyway. But it's the local laws that's affecting everything, right? It's the local stuff. It's the stuff that the local elections that makes a difference in the state. It's a vote for governor and those statewide elections that's so important for Georgia. Now we have new Democrats running for governor of Florida, and I understand some Beto O'Rourke might be running in Texas. I mean, but these laws are going to restrict the people that they depend on in order to vote for them. And so Texas is doing something that's way beyond what I think anybody would ever think, dream, or even imagine. I mean, they are way out on a limb when it comes to their voting rights. They have one of the most comprehensive restricted voting bills in Texas called the TXSB 7 bill, which has already passed out of committees. Check it out now. It's out of the committees already, right? And it was up for a vote, and if it wasn't for the Democrats, when they were ready to vote for it, walked out on it 2 days ago, right before Memorial Day. But they walked out. Democrats walked out, and by walking out, they didn't have a quorum. They couldn't vote. And as long as the Democrats stay out, I hope they stay out, and they can't vote on it, so they couldn't vote on the bill. But it's one of the most restrictive ever. I mean, this bill that Texas has is worse than the early days of Jim Crow. I mean, and we're just sitting back watching the news trying to see what happened. No, send a donation to somebody that's trying to get rid of this stuff. Help somebody out. Open our eyes up so that so our brothers and sisters in Texas can have legal representation. And they can be able to run for elections. They can be able to win elections. They can be people in their districts and things of that nature, okay? And so the bill has a wide range of restrictions on voting access. For example, SB, it's called Senate Bill SB. Senate Bill 7 seeks to limit mail voting by enacting comprehensive restrictions, including prohibitions on state or local election officials sending unsolicited mail ballot applications to voters and on the use of any unstaffed drop boxes. It's the same thing I've been talking about. Drop boxes and restricting people from sending applications based on affirmative, based on the affirmative, and also keeping people from on the absentee ballot to making sure they have proper ID and all the other things that they have. Very comprehensive. It was widespread. And so what does it mean for people in Texas trying to vote? It means you got to do a lot more now to get an absentee ballot. You just can't walk up to the county clerk's office anymore and get a ballot with just your ID card. You got to do a whole lot more than that now. It's very restrictive in how you send it and how you mail it. And they've also restricted the people who are trying to help in that matter. So it would also limit early voting hours. I talked about that a lot. And believe me, folks, I don't know how much longer early voting hours are going to stick around if we don't get the For the People Act passed and Nancy Pelosi and the other Democrats have put in the Congress. We really need to get that passed. And we really need to have the John Lewis bill passed as well. What the John Lewis bill would do was to undo what the Supreme Court did to us before the 2016 election. And what it said that the states such as South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and some other states did not need the federal government to look at their redistricting plans or to look at their voting processes in order for them to be legitimate, in order for them to pass through the courts. And so when they took that out of the hands of the federal government, southern states went crazy. They just started writing all kinds of voter restricting laws after that because there's no oversight. If you don't have Big Brother watching you and you can go ahead and write restricted laws as much as you want and you know the Supreme Court has already backed you up, what are you going to do? You're going to write as many laws as you want. And this is what's happening. That's why there's a surplus. There's an overflow. There's a drive. You know, there's an overwhelming delight with these people in terms of writing restrictive laws. And so there's no checks and balances. And so what the John Lewis Voting Rights Act would do is to restore what the Supreme Court turned down a few years ago. And so that way, having the John Lewis back is a good step, and having that law. And so now we have some oversight over states who are writing these restrictive laws, and then the Justice Department can say, no, you can't do that, and then we have some oversight. But the For the People Act, Voting Rights Act, does something different. What that does is that it makes sure that you can vote. They want to have a national voting day. They want to be able to get rid of some of the restrictive laws that's going on in the states. They want to be able to, the people are doing this because, not the people, but most of the GOP governors and legislative branches are putting these restricted laws in it because they are afraid that the For the People Voting Rights Act is going to get passed. And the For the People Rights Act is going to protect you. These are expansive laws. They expanding laws. Not only you have restricted bills, but you also have expanded bills, bills that expand voting rights and your right to vote. But the expanded one dealing with law kind of squashes all of this. It kind of kills all of this. But what these people are doing is trying to put all this stuff up as a backdrop to against what might come out of the Congress. But so far, we can't get that done. And the reason why we can't get it done because, as Joe Biden said today, we have, a tie in the Senate, but we do have a couple of senators that voted more with GOP than they voted with Democrats. Joe Manchin is one of them. How do you handle a guy like Joe? He wants the John Rights Voting Rights Act bill passed, but he doesn't want the For the People Act, which is the better law, right? And then got other things like dealing with some other things that he won't vote for, but those are problems that we have to deal with. And if you're from West Virginia watching this, maybe you need to start sending some letters out to your people there and seeing what we can do with Brother Joe. So that's Texas. It also it would increase the risk of long lines on election day. Did you hear that? They would increase the risk of long lines on election day by limiting the use of certain mobile or drive-through polling places and changing this. You know how people who are handicapped, they used to pull up to the curb and do curbside voting? This eliminates that. You're not going to be able to do that. So if you're a handicapped person, your best bet now is the absentee ballot, and your best bet is to have all your identification, have everything you need to send off along with it, right? So it's going to curb everything that you do. And so no more the mobile stuff is going on. They don't trust the mobile. They don't trust the ballots. What do you trust, right? What do they expect from us? And so they also, Senate bill also said requiring voters who want to vote by mail on the basis of disability to provide written documentations for their disability. Now they want to prove that you're disabled. They want to prove that you're disabled before they give you a ballot. And SB 7 also would reduce protections against voters' intimidation by rolling back common sense checks on poll watchers. And so poll watchers can come up and intimidate you, and you can't do anything about it. You can intimidate you. And so it's like the current and with a camera or iPhone or something and watch you while you're voting. So those are that's some of the other stuff that's taking place. And so let's move on to Arizona. Arizona has 7 restricted bills are advancing in the House. 4 Arizona bills seek to make absentee voting more difficult. Have y'all heard already with the states that I already mentioned? It's the same thing. They are the same schemes, man, all over. And just imagine if all the other states that what we call the battleground states adopt us. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, Florida, Ohio, even Nevada was a battleground state this year. Just imagine if all of them do this. Let's do the same thing everybody else is doing. And so this is Arizona, and they're fighting in Arizona now with going back and getting private voter information to private citizens who don't know anything about ballot voting and putting them in some kind of machine so they can come up with something to prove that Donald Trump supposedly won an election in Arizona. And Georgia, people can't do anything about it. The people are powerless to do anything about it. In other words, they're trying to overturn the votes in Georgia, and the people there can't do anything about it. That is a darn shame. That is a darn shame. When the Constitution talks about we the people, no, it ain't we the people, it's the people and them. The people who are making the laws and passing the laws are the ones who are trying to govern our lives in terms of what we can do and what we can't do. And so it's no more about a constitutional mandate for us to have rights and privileges and so forth, but it's about what somebody else think we ought to have and avoid the Constitution altogether. No, I don't think you should vote. I don't think you're eligible to vote. I don't think you deserve to vote. You shouldn't be part of the electoral process. This is a privilege only to certain people. That's the way these people think. It's a privilege for some people, and you're not in on that privilege. And a lot of times we sit back watching that. We're allowing them to do that. And we have to stop that ourselves and get involved in the process and try to understand some things. And so Georgia is no different from all the rest in limiting everything that somebody can do, registration drives and bills that don't even exist. And New Hampshire, on the other hand, if you go to New Hampshire, on the other hand, has 10 restricted bills and advancing bills. Now, you would think New Hampshire, this is I guess, northern state. You know, New Hampshire and Maine. Why would New Hampshire and Maine have these kind of voter restriction laws? Nobody would think that. But they do. In New Hampshire, for example, they have 2 bills targeting election day registration. It's called the New Hampshire House Bill 86. And it would eliminate election day registration altogether. So how election day registration works? Let's say you haven't registered all year, right? And in some states, if you didn't register, you can register on election day. If you have your proper ID, you have everything you need, you can register on that day and vote the same day. Well, what they're doing, because it's been an advantage for Democrats, because there's certain people who waited to the last minute to decide they want to vote or register or whatever, and so they had the opportunity where they can vote and register on the same day. Now, bills in New Hampshire and other places like that, they're eliminating that altogether, right? And this is in Georgia. You know, in North Carolina they did it, you know, where people used to be able to vote. I'm not sure if this is enacted or what the problem is in Carolina, but I do know that it was a bill that came up like that and try to take away people privileges to register and vote on the same day. And so this is what the New Hampshire bill does too. It would require that voters who register on election day with a qualified voter affidavit or sworn statement have their photograph taken at the time of registration. That's if they do it, right? And so again, the 2 bills would eliminate it altogether, one of them, and while another one would require that voters who register on election day do so with a qualified affidavit. I don't know what that is, man. What is it? Do I have to go to the court? Get them to sign something for me to vote? A sworn statement has to be stamped by approval by somebody else and have a photograph taken at the time of registration. They have 2 bills taken aimed at student voters. One of them says it would eliminate the use of college and university ID cards and as a valid photo ID. Now, this has hit several states hard because students, a lot of them don't have a driver's license. And they tell you that don't bring your car to college, right, your first year. And so it's not because of that, but a lot of them just don't have transportation, don't have a car, don't have a driver's license, right? And the best ID they can get is a university ID. Now, university IDs are authentic, right? You should be able to use them in you know, everything you do in a university. If a university has checked out your background, they know who you are, they know, you know, where you're from, they know, you know, they put you in the system or whatever they do, and on a huge background, and they give you an ID card, they have reassured you that you are a member of this college and this university, and that your identification is something that authenticates that you're here, and that you enrolled in this university, and that we trust you, and so on and so on. And so now they're saying that you can't use that as a voter, as a way to vote. But you shouldn't have to have any ID at all, okay? Folks, this is the whole point. I used to vote when we used to have any kind of ID. I walked, in this last election, I didn't show my ID. I just walked up to the table and gave the person my name. And they looked my name up, right? And saw it, and I voted. I didn't show any ID. And nobody has either for, what? I don't know, 100 years, people have been voting without identification. Why is it a problem now? Why is it a problem all of a sudden that people need to have something? Well, and the argument is always made, well, people have to have ID to go to the bank. Yeah, because it's your money. They want to make sure it's your money. You know, that's stupid. I wouldn't want somebody to go in the bank and say, I'm John Doe, and I want my $300,000 out of the bank. You got to have something to verify who you are. Voting is not like that. It's a right that we have. And once we register and you prove that we have registered in good faith, why would I need to show you an ID card after that? My name is right there. I mean, there may be somebody, yes, that will walk in and say, I am John Doe, and you are not John Doe, and know your address. Yes, that may happen, but election officials tell us that it's very rare. There's no widespread use of that anywhere in this country where somebody is claimed to be somebody else. and his election is that most Republicans, especially those who backed Donald Trump, were in line voting more than 1 or 2 times and using their dead parents' name in order to vote because they had not been purged from the roll. But when it comes to African American, we ain't even dead, and we're purged from the roll. You see what I'm saying? So it's a big difference in what people restricting or eliminating voters without valid identification to prohibit proof. I mean, I fought against this whole voter ID thing in North Carolina. They had it on the ballot, and unfortunately it passed, but we fought it in the courts and everything, and it didn't go far. But that's a sad thing when kind of make somebody have all of these restrictions in order to be able to vote. And so if you look at, as I get ready to close, and if you look at, let me move up a little bit. We talked about Texas already, and the comprehensive bills that Texas has passed already, and the things they're trying to do there. We talked about other restrictive laws in Florida. Targets the state's absentee ballot process. And this is what everybody else is doing. The bill would ban ballot boxes. So you want to have nowhere to put your boxes, put your mail in Florida. You got to take it to the, I don't know, clerk's office, post office. It limits assistance with ballot delivery and immediate family members. So you can't help your aging grandparents to do much of their voter absentee ballot. And it shortened the length of time that a person can stay on an absentee voter list. In Michigan, lawmakers introduced 8 restrictive bills on a single day. In one day. Now, this is the same state where terrorists took over the Capitol. Took over the Capitol building with shotguns and machetes and everything else they had up there, rifles and everything else. Took over the building, walked inside of it with guns all over the Capitol. This is the same state that allowed them to do that with no restrictions on guns and just allow people to run around with handguns all over the state and so have not yet advanced through the State House. They are concerning as they restrict voter ID for both in person and in mail, make it harder to request it, and things of that nature. And so not all the other things that you see in other states, Michigan is pretty much doing the same thing. And so I think in conclusion, you see some of the signs I put up when dealing with register to vote and people having a right to vote. Here's a picture of Fannie Lou Hamer, who talk about she's been sick and tired and sick and tired and sick and tired and ain't just some things of that nature. But I think since we brought along the President Obama, he talks about the struggle for the Voting Rights Act, taught us that people who love this country can change it and don't give away your power. And that's what I'm trying to get to say to you now. Don't give away your power. You have the power to vote. You have the power to elect people, the power to put people in office. You got the power to do that. Don't give it away. Look at the laws in your state and try to make a difference. Do something. Send a if you can't do anything, send a donation to a group that you know that's working toward that. You know, and if you can't do that, volunteer some local offices or something like that. Volunteer to be a voter person, because we need more Afro-American people who are volunteering for these kind of jobs. And if we had more of us in there, we could kind of eliminate some of the things that's going on the inside. Because once the GOP legislative branch allows a certain amount of GOP legislators and observers inside of the ballot booth, it's not the booth itself, but inside of the bill, it's going to be a tough time, because if these laws go, they're going to be challenging everything you do. And I don't want to see that happen. I want to have a good and fair election. And the State Department stated last year that the election was good and fair. We had fair elections in this country. And so, I mean, we need to get on that. But remember that all of this is done because of the Afro and the people of color vote in 2020. It's because you went out and put a black woman in the White House as a vice president, put Joe Biden in there as the president of the United States, and it happened because of that. Because Biden has now the most diverse administration in the history of this country, and he's bringing in people who can get the job done. And so with the GOP and where they want to go, they can't win a national election, so they're trying to cheat. When people can't win, that's what they do. They take their ball and they go home, and they come up with a whole lot of rules. And this is what's happening now. These people can't win a fair election because we simply don't want to be led by many of the rules and guidelines and the things that they promote. Some of the stuff they promote, most of the nation frown on it. Most of the nation don't adhere to it. Most of the nation do not want it. Be involved in the January 6th riot, an insurrection, be involved in that, and then you turn around and tell the nation that, oh, what I saw was a tour, or people were on tour that day, or the people were well-meaning, or the people, they were just trying to get their country back, and you are elected official, and you stand there and say that in front of the American people, and there's no repercussion for you, and put up a sign and say you re-elect me for office, and there are people out there put you right back in, and there's enough people out there, good, fair-minded people can say, no, you won't get back in this year. Well, they are going to get back in if we don't do something about these restricted bills, these restricted laws. And so we need to do something to make sure that they don't. And so having said that, I think I'll close it there with a few more slides about some of the other things that's taking place across the nation and the people that we see. They have a motley crew of people, young people who are who are out there, and I'm so proud of these young people now and what they're doing and raising the awareness of voting, raising awareness of the George Floyd Act, the awareness of policing in communities. And so I'm so proud of what they're doing, but at the same time, we got to do our part too. We come too far. And it's the old saying, God has not brought us this far to leave us alone. And so we thank you for that. I thank you for the presentation tonight. If you have questions on your website, I'll be glad to answer them for you. I think Jamal let me know if there are some. And do we have any questions in the audience? Okay. We're good? Okay, we're good for tonight. So I want you to come back on tomorrow at 7 o'clock again. And we have a dynamic program again tomorrow night with policing in the black community. We have some very good guests coming with us and coming here. We really want you to tune in and see what they have to say about policing in the Afro-American community. Right. I'll let Jamal come back and close us out.
Amen to all of you for joining us in the sacred virtual space on tonight. We thank you for being attentive. Tell your friends, tell your neighbor. Tomorrow night, we'll be talking about policing in the black community. We will have Dr. Lorenzo Boyd from the University of New Haven, Connecticut, will be with us tonight. He is a professor of criminology and criminal justice. He is also a criminal justice commentator, along with Chief Drew from the City of Newport News Police Department will be with us on tomorrow night to talk about policing and policing in the black community. We will not do benediction tonight, but we'll say farewell and we'll see you tomorrow night. God bless.